Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Dandelion Dynasty Book 4, Speaking Bones, Chapters 13, 14, and 15. In these chapters, titled Wolfthane, Burial Boxes, and Spirit Portrait, we get a pretty great scheme, almost a heist, if you will, but it's a little bit dampened by the loss of somebody that I didn't think we were going to say goodbye to. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. So, yeah, this section was thankfully not as heavy on the torture and oppression as some of the other chapters have been. But we do have some pretty serious loss. And it is compounded by the fact that Thera winds up having to take on that loss by actually committing a murder. And, it's the sort of thing I really have trouble using the word murder sometimes, because I feel like there's a sort of malice implied with that word. And there have been recently a couple things I have covered where the use is applied to people who are guilty of allowing a person to die in a variety of ways, sometimes in a sort of passive way, and not passive, not in the way of I turned a blind eye to a thing and just didn't concern myself, but passive in the I could have called for help and I did not do that kind of passive, which is still pretty active, I guess. But nevertheless, I always have heard the word murder, and I think of it as an accusation in a way that's there is an intent behind it to rob somebody of their life for gain, whether that's gain of a material type or gain of a personal gratification. And I have to sort of realize that that's not necessarily what the word means. It's just the way I see the word. And so when I hesitate to call what Thera does murder, I'm not really being very honest. I'm just letting my own feelings about the situation cloud things. So let's start off. Chapter 13, we get dropped into this thing where, it's pretty clear what's going on, but you aren't given explicitly the information about it until a little bit later. So we're in Ukyugonde, and it says, another spring had arrived in Ukyugonde. Babies born during winter sniffed for the first time the moist scent of cactus dew carried on fresh breezes, instead of the perpetual smoky haze inside sealed tents. And I have got to say, you guys, in the modern age, with all the ways that we can condition our environments, we can heat and cool centrally, and we don't have to rely on fires and whatnot. It is still really a marked difference when you're finally able to open your windows when it gets warm enough and let fresh air in and sort of air out your home. And I cannot imagine what it must have been like when you lived in tents and everything had to be closed and sealed all the time because of the extreme cold and the sort of unforgiving nature of the land that you were in. And as a person who has Owen and I have a fire pit, and there have been times where I will wake up after having used the fire pit the night before, and the reek of smoke in my hair and in my clothes makes me want to gag. It's just too much. I love the smell of wood smoke, on the air, You know, when you step outside and it's cool and you've got this breeze and you smell it coming from somewhere, it's like, ooh. But when you wake up and it's like clinging to you and it's like a stale sort of smell, whole different energy, right? I have often thought how awful it must be for everything to smell that way all the time. So anyway, I know that I'm already getting sidetracked here on a small thing, but I just wanted to mention it because I found this like description really affecting, actually. So we get a little bit of like a touch base here with what's going on with the Kuju's people and the way that the story about what happened with Thera has been spun. And he is just trying to make the best of the fact that she is still out there and alive, which doesn't make him look great. But at least he actually thinks that she's not alive. He's been told that likely she is dead, but this dude has like made it seem like, oh no, I saw them plummet to their deaths. There's no way. But even he, in his story, doesn't actually see their like crumpled bodies. And he is like really trying to create his own legacy here. So there is even more posturing happening right now than normal because he has information on going through the Wall of Storms and fully intends to basically go down there and seize control from his sister, which is what had been predicted. Like, this is what Kutan Rova has been sort of holding over Tom Vanaki's head, is the fact that her brother or someone may come down with more forces and wrest away control of what's going on from her. And he fully plans on that to the point that like there are people who have praised his sister's fighting prowess and they get like punished or exiled. And I was just, there are times where I don't really understand how people's minds work. And this is the kind of thing where I have to think it makes you look weak to be so sensitive to your sister getting praise. But apparently he has like pretty tight control over his people. So I guess it works for him. And let's see, he would then return to Ukyu triumphant, bringing undreamed of treasures and docile slaves from that distant, indolent land. And that was the part that kind of surprised me, was his story was that he was going to take things and turn around and come back. Now, I don't know if that's genuinely what he intends, or if he's telling people that so that it feels to them like they've got something to gain. Because if it's just, oh, we're going to go and we're going to like expand and explore and colonize, maybe the people being left behind won't really give a shit too much and be that enthusiastic about it. But if you make it sound like you're seizing precious things and coming back to share, I just don't know whether he means it. So he gets told by some people who are out here, like the Naros, and that he needs to come pronto because something wild has been spotted. And when he asks them, they won't tell him. They insist he has to see it. And what it turns out it is an iceberg that has wandered all the way down here and has the boxes inside that Dara people get buried in. And I thought it was kind of funny that they just had no way to describe this. I was like, I feel like that's pretty easy to describe, but okay. And the whole, like, the broad strokes of how this goes is that there are boxes here that look to carry the remains of Thera and Takval, and that he thinks probably this is booby-trapped. So this is just a wild. So he is determined to open it to check, but he doesn't want to risk himself. So he tells his second in command, what is his name, Tovo, who had been the one to try and chase them across the ice, that he needs to open it. And Tovo is aware that this doesn't look great for him. Basically, he's being tested and forced to open it because the idea that she was like recovered and then buried like this if she fell in a crevasse is very unlikely. So his story is starting to get a little bit patchy. And because Kuju is a pretty suspicious dude, he is just like, all right, well, I don't believe you. I'm pretty sure you can see that I don't believe you. So I'm going to go ahead and have you open this because you're kind of out of favor with me right now. And if you blow up, sucks to suck. And he does open it expecting a full-on explosion. Like, Tovo is low-key ready to die in this scene. And finally, it turns out that there is a body inside. And y'all, I know that I had just ended the last section with Takval being like on the edge of death. I still didn't think there was going to be a body inside. And like, it turns out there are stones in the box, which is part of what makes it so heavy. Because that's part of what's making Kuju like suspicious, is that the stones, which he doesn't know that's what they are on the outside, but when he feels the box and how abnormally heavy it is for there to just be a person's body in it, that's what leads him to think it may be booby-trapped. Now, it turns out those stones are put here so that the box with a body in it weighs the same as the boxes that do not have bodies in them. But from the first glance, what he's thinking is, oh, they're all like this because they put heated stones in the bottom of the box to get them to sink into the ice of the iceberg, which is actually kind of a neat idea. I'm not going to lie. So I really just forgot that Takval was on the edge of death. I didn't want to accept it. I'm still kind of mad about it that Takval, like, after everything he went through, doesn't get to see them returning to Dara after all this. It's just so deeply unfair. And like, I know that's life, but we're in a book and I was just hoping that maybe he would get some of what he deserved. Now, I will grant you, they have put his body to excellent use with this little ruse. So I know he's happy about it. Because Thera comes up with this idea and tells him about it. And he's like, you know, kind of gleeful about the fact that she has figured out a way to use him even in death to get herself and her people back over into Dara. That's sort of him managing to like fulfill his promise after all. However, it's not him being alive and seeing things for himself. And I just really hate that for him. So, yeah, I was kind of made myself forget that he was not alive. And then when he turns up dead in this box, I will not lie again, I thought it was somebody else's body. I was like, oh, well, they probably just put another body in there. Somebody else, you know? And I'm just a real dodo bird sometimes. That's all it comes down to. So we're going to back up here a little bit and we're going to go to the scene with Saof. Saof is doing Garinafin patrols, and he is looking like he, posted guard, and there are people coming toward him. Every effort had to be made to prevent acts of sabotage from the subjugated and the enslaved. And I'm like, yeah, what about people who seem to not be subjugated and or enslaved? So these people come. As the Garinafin made a low, wide circle over the caravan, he took stock of the strangers. A single rider sat on top of a long-haired bull, followed by a line of cows. A string of captives, about 20 in number, their necks connected by sinew ropes, marched alongside the cattle. Some of them were dressed like Aegon's slaves, while others wore sleek furs from animals he didn't recognize. On each side of the marching group, running up and down to keep the cows and captives in line, were several large white-haired dogs who could almost be mistaken for horrid wolves, which I'm assuming are like basically huskies, which is adorable, even though I know that they are actually probably pretty vicious in this scenario. So, this woman who has this like skull helmet, it's like a horrid wolf skull. I love that they're called horrid wolves. Like, I hate that name, honestly, but I think it's supposed to be sort of a play on dire wolves. And there is something about making it horrid wolves that feels so, it's like pointing out the goofiness of dire wolves to me. But he wants to see her name, and she says that she was scarred by a Gorinnefin when she was a child, and she only shows her face to her enemies when she's about to kill them so that she can see them, like, you know, shrink back in terror is the way that she words it. And he is like, the first thing that he notices is that she has the accent of the upper class, because it's, I kind of forget that that's like a thing with the Liuku, that there are tiers of hierarchy that are detectable by accents, even in this society. But this is like, it turns out she is just really good at imitating this accent. Now, I thought that this was going to turn out to be Thera. And because I wasn't really sure if anybody would recognize Thera. So if they didn't show her face, then maybe she could get away with it. Like, I wasn't really clear exactly how much she would be willing to put herself in the crosshairs, whether she'd be able to pull this off. Like, you know what I'm saying? And so I went through a lot of this initially thinking that this was going to wind up being Thera. And when he starts to like put some things together, looking at her, looking at the slaves, she's saying that she is from a tribe that he has never heard of. And he's like, but wait, that is one that I am not familiar with. So like part of her story is feeling like it makes sense. And then when he looks at some of the details, it doesn't line up at all. So what she does is she makes this gesture, and he doesn't understand the body language of the people behind her. The slaves behind her look to him like they are about to spring upon her and hurt her. Like they are going to sort of rebel against her. And what I'm assuming is going on there is that they are realizing that maybe this guy isn't going to buy her story, and they have to be ready to defend her, potentially. But he thinks that this is them, you know, about to rebel against their rightful master. And she does this gesture, and they like collapse. And it's I love this so much. They basically collapse screaming as if she has got a magical power, I guess. I'm not really sure. I think that's supposed to be the implication here. That she is able to subdue them with a wave of her hand because she just has this like gift from being up in the north where magic is like more of a thing. And he like just takes it for granted that that's definitely a real thing that's happening, and that it makes sense that she has become like a wolf thane because of these powers. It's wild to me how willing he is to believe it. And I don't feel like I had a good enough grip on what is what the Liuku, like their mythology, what would be believable. Because, you know, somebody tries to do something like this in Dara, and there's definitely an element, a huge element of superstition in Dara, but it's usually about like, oh, the gods have put something in place. You set something up to make it seem as if the gods have done a thing, which we know the Liuku also do. We've seen that before. But an individual behaving as if they have got a power of their own, I don't recall anybody ever acting like this was a thing or talking about this really being a thing. Like, it's not even really rumored of big famous leaders, is it? I don't know. Anyway, he does believe it. I just kind of didn't expect it to work, but I guess he's cowed enough already by her attitude that he's like willing to go with it. And this causes him to drop to his knees and essentially be like, I'll do literally whatever you say, because you were clearly a massive badass, and I'm so sorry for holding you up unnecessarily. Pardon the disrespect. And she wants to go into the Gorinophin pens in order to select a mount before things get into the feasting stage, when shit is going to be way too chaotic. And he accepts this explanation, but it's because she doesn't have a Gorinophin of her own. So it's basically, I'm giving you these slaves and these cows and everything, and I'm taking a Gorinophin. I feel like that's a fair trade. And he's like, all right, go to the thing. So we have this awful sequence that I listened to this section twice, and I will admit I kind of like skipped over rereading this, where we learn about the ways in which the Gorinophins are trained. It's really fucking awful. It is as bad as it gets in terms of torturing, mutilating, murdering, using children against parents, using parents against children. It's just about worst case scenario in every sense. And the fact that they are animals, you know, we know how intelligent they are. And it's really wild to me how they can, like, simultaneously, these people will be like, we're going to use this to torment them and torture them into obedience, but also act like they are not very intelligent. Then these familial ties wouldn't matter. You know, like using a child to torture it in front of its parents to make the parents do a thing. That's not something that would work on most types of animals. A Gorinophin is obviously intelligent enough to have a kind of human reaction. So they're clearly developed enough in their societal, like, intricacies that this is what happens, you know, when people try and, like, justify the reasons for oppressing a group, whether or not it's a human group or not. They try and act like, well, you know, they're not smart enough so that it's not even worth arguing whether or not we should be doing this. That's what they're there for. But then in the other breath, they want to be like, but they are capable of, like, learning very specific commands and being able to care about one another and have this, like, psychological thing used against them. It's weird. So she goes into this pen and is looking around and says something about how the stables are in really bad condition and is just sort of horrified at the state of things. And the groom who is in charge is used to this sort of, what we get from him is mostly they are super underfunded and they don't have, like, the work that they do here is not respectful of what Garinnifins really need. They get what they need out of them up to a point, but because they push them so hard and abuse them so heavily, they do die sooner than they should, and they are not in the shape that they should be. So there's a lot more injuries, and due to the, the kind of, I'm trying to think of the word that his campaign is like, I guess you would call it a campaign, but he's going after Thera, and he's also trying to amass people in order to go through the Wall of Storms, and he's also defending himself. And there's all of this activity that is causing the Garinnifins to be used more often and more heavily and brutally than usual. So this dude is like fully aware that the operation is embarrassing and that it looks bad on him. But he has done his best and requested help a million times and doesn't get it. And a lot of the people who work here are so they are personally so oppressed that they will take their rage in their situation out on the Garinnifins, which is really awful. There's just a lot about the operation here that it's really short-sighted and kind of reminding me of the ways that Tovo was letting all of the dogs die when they were heading north without really any concern for how they were planning to get back. I think Tovo's assumption was we'll just use the dogs that we get once we capture the ice fleas and the Dara slaves. But here it's do you just intend to steal more Garinnifins? There is a limited amount of these. What exactly is it just, again, short-sightedness. So, Kuju and the senior Thanes lavished attention on their personal mounts, but they cared little for the rank and file war beasts. And when he says something about how the Pekyu is perfectly satisfied with the conditions here and everything, and she's like, "Are you serious? These things are not going to win against an Aegon Garinnifin that's in shape. You were able to win in Kiri Valley because you had an element of surprise, but that's not going to happen in future. Y'all are going to be in some bad shape." And she is wandering around trying to pick him out. Everyone that she comes across, she has an issue with. And then they get to one, and there is an injury, and there are two grooms with the Garinnifin saying he's doing better today. Apparently, this Garinnifin has a broken foot, and because of that, he is just meant to go get slaughtered immediately. That's just not even a question, and he's already given the order for that to happen, and the grooms have ignored him. And he is yelling at them, and one of them says he'll heal if he's properly taken care of. Radia and I have nursed many injured Garinnifins back to health. And I was like, it's Radia and Tove. I can't even tell you guys. I was so excited. They really got... I don't think I realized just how much I grew to love Radia and Toof over these chapters, but I love them so much. I'm just so excited to see them again. So they're arguing, and he's just go fucking bring it to the slaughter grounds now. And Toof is begging. He's a veteran war mount. He has wisdom to teach the others. And then finally, we have Rita, the Wolf Thane, saying, "I want this one." And both of the grooms looking at her are you fucking kidding? And he says, he's injured. He's useless. And she says, "My mind is made up, and I'll be staying in Totten until the departure of the fleet, so there's plenty of time for him to heal." And Rita is so commanding about this and very dismissive of him. So eventually when he walks away, he's very eager to get the fuck away from her, which is a tactic that never really occurred to me in terms of like finding a way to be alone with somebody, just making it so that someone dislikes you so much they're eager to get away. A very basic tactic that like seems quite effective here. So she reveals herself, and it turns out it's Thorio. I was thinking it was Thera again this whole time. Thorio, after all. Which actually, once I stopped and thought about it, made a lot of sense because of Thorio's like gifted nature with languages. I thought that Thera could still like imitate it pretty well, but I should have known better. So then we go to 14, and the burial boxes have been taken out of the ice. It took like 4 days to get them out from under the ice. And this is going to be a huge ceremony. Kuju is planning to open the box with Thera's skull and like, or with her body, use her skull, or I think maybe her like pelvic bone or something, to like serve food on. And he plans to like drink out of Takval's skull. The whole thing is so like completely over the top that I could not stop laughing at the fact that he really thinks this is I don't really understand the situation with the people of the Aegon. So I may be wrong about this, but he really seems to think that this is going to be a way to confirm his dominion over them. Like, you know, and they were already dead, and you just like went and ransacked their bodies after the fact. Like, this doesn't have anything to do with you. It just feels to me so weak and so performative. And I can't tell because we're not really in other people's heads quite enough to see. I can't tell if this is actually working for him and people believe in him as a genuinely fearsome leader, or if he is seen through, you know, I just don't know. But yeah, this whole thing is like, what he wants to do is gather all of his people and have them see the opening of these boxes and realize that he is the one who like is responsible for their deaths, because the story that Tovo gave him is at least that we chased them into this crevasse, and he feels like he can kind of indirectly take credit, even though I think that's a pretty tenuous link. So let's see. The pipes fell silent and the singing voices faded away. Kuju emerged from the great tent and climbed onto the earthen platform. Slowly, he stepped up to the 2 large burial boxes, his hands lifted to the heavens. Every pair of eyes was on him. And as this is happening, I should back up a little bit here. But there is a fight amongst some of the grooms in the Garinnifin pits, the slaves. And a lot of people have gathered around and are making bets, and the fight's really good. And because it's like just a couple of lower level people, nobody breaks the fight up. There's no motivation to do that. And it's a distraction purely. And I'm assuming that they are like getting several of the Garinnifins out of here, because To'of he says, calm down, just try to be quiet. And he takes the ropes off of one of the young Garinnifins that's in like a cave. And I'm really curious, like, if it's going to be more than just this one, if there are others as well that they're spiriting away, don't know. And back to Kuju, he's trying to open these boxes, and he digs his knife into the edge of one, and opening the one that had Takval in it was really, really easy. So he is intending to just kind of do this in one swipe. And when he digs his knife in, nothing happens. It's like stuck. So he has a bit of an awkward moment where he has to push a bit harder in order to get the knife in, which is already sort of embarrassing for him. And finally, he starts to really yank on it. And a faint rumbling rolled across the scrublands from afar, perhaps the start of a thunderstorm. And he says, "The gods of Ukyu are watching us open our gift, ready to celebrate with us." He had to act like everything was going as planned to control the situation. The assembly was expecting him to present the trophies inside the boxes, and he couldn't afford the loss of prestige should he show any sign of hesitation. And dude, it's just... All right, go ahead. The burial box disappeared in a brilliant flash of light and engulfed him, and he was dead before he even heard the explosion. And I gotta say, I really appreciate it being written this way. He was dead because, like, you know, we saw Tovo fall through the ice, and I was all excited thinking Tovo was fucking dead, and he was not dead. It was just an arm, just a couple of toes that he lost. Like, not enough. So I think that this also means a bunch of his, like, senior people are also dead because they were probably gathered around him. Do not know exactly how big that explosion would have been because of the other boxes. Like, I'm assuming that they were all booby trapped as well. So if his goes off and it sets off the others, how big is that? And he had, like, gotten them dug out of the ice, but they're still all standing on the iceberg, if I'm not mistaken. So I guess it has to just be as many people fit on there. But anyway, I don't get we don't touch back with that in this section, because then we go to Thera and we have, like, jumped back in time 5 months. And this is really rough, you guys. It turns out that what Takval has asked of Thera is that she take the breath from his lungs in order to and take the blood from his body and mix it with hers, so that she now have the blood of the Aegon running through her, and she can claim the title of Pekyu. But also, she has to actually kill Takval. And y'all, this is really hard. Like, you know, it's one thing to be like, I'm going to let my beloved die by unplugging a machine or giving them a drink with a poison in it that will send them to sleep forever. It's a very different thing to hand them a fucking dagger and be like, you're going to have to plunge this into my heart. Like, you know, that is a lot. And when she asks whether or not, because, like, the point is that she has to be somebody who has spilled blood. And she is, like, trying to say, I have caused the deaths of a lot of people. Doesn't that count? Isn't that enough? And I think it's Ajulek, who says, you know, that's a very indirect thing. You never got your own hands dirty. So no, you're going to have to go ahead and do this yourself to at least, like, convince the gods that you are connected enough directly to know what it's like to take a life up close and personal. And I think that makes a lot of sense, to be honest. There is I can't remember if it was, like, just a story or if it was a suggestion made in a book, but basically there was somebody who was philosophizing about the concept of a button to, like, you know, send a nuclear bomb overseas and just remotely kill millions of people, and how easy it would feel to do that. And it shouldn't feel so easy. So their suggestion was, get a volunteer and have the key that you have to insert and turn surgically implanted in their body. And if you want to turn the key and push the button, you have to kill them and get the key out. In a very Saw sort of situation. But the premise being, if you can't stand the thought of having to kill one person standing in front of you, face to face, how fucking dare you contemplate pressing that fucking button, you coward. And as much as it's like a kind of, the comparison isn't exactly a one-to-one, there was a big part of me that like really saw their point and felt like, I'm not sure I totally disagree with that. You know, the thought of being able to kill so many people at just the press of a button is like an alien concept to me. I'll never be in that position, I don't think. And I have never been saddled with a responsibility anywhere near that size. So, you know, a part of me is kind of like, isn't it hard enough already? But honestly, there are people out there who it wouldn't be that hard for them to, and it should. So, I don't know, something like this kind of feels like maybe that's a reasonable obstacle to throw in their way. I'm trying to find the spot here where, how can we possibly know what the gods want? How do we know the sun will rise again or that spring will come? That's different. It isn't. No matter how many miles you've flown, you must still will yourself to trust the next wing beat will keep you aloft. No matter how much you experience and plan and calculate, you must still leap into the unknown. So she is sitting here with Takval, and you guys, I love how much I've come to care about Takval. You know, he's not like my favorite, but he has become a steady sort of presence. Somebody that I feel she can really trust. He has had her back like relentlessly, you know, and has been very level-headed and taken some real crazy risks, like considering everything from an objective standpoint, has put a lot of trust in Thera and the Dara people. And I was just taken aback at how moved I was by this. Like, the whole, you know, normally I say this with full acknowledgement that this is maybe me being a little bit heartless, but there have been more than one book I've read where my main has to kill somebody and they fucking dither and talk about how it's not fair, or they don't want to, or they're not ready, or how can I do this? Oh my God, it's like, you know, this is just unfair. And I really don't have a lot of patience for it. I can recognize that it's a completely realistic reaction and see how it's an effort to characterize them and make them feel like a person. And I admit all of that is true, and I see that. But it can be really boring and tedious to read. It can just drag, you know, and make you be like, look, I know you're going to do it eventually anyway. Or alternatively, I know you're not going to wind up having to do it. So I'm really sick of sitting here listening to this because you're going to wind up in a situation where this isn't even necessary. And I've had to like listen to you bellyache this whole time. Do you know what I'm saying? This, though, with Thera, it feels so different to me. Because I think the part of the reason is, for me, there was no doubt, even for an instant, she was going to do it. Of course she was going to do it. I knew she was going to do it. However, it isn't fair. And after everything she's been through, there's a point at which she's like screaming to herself in her head, I've already lost so much. And she fucking has, though. You know, like when Rashawn and I have been covering A Song of Ice and Fire, the Catelyn chapters started to get kind of rough because Catelyn has lost so much and she keeps referring to how much she has lost in this endless, repetitive, rhythmic sort of way that I found started to get tiresome. And it's not to say that I don't understand that she has indeed lost all of this, but there is a way to do this that is either you're going to be relentless and repetitive as a motif, which it didn't quite feel like it edged into that territory, or you're doing this because you want us to feel the depth of the loss, which it didn't really do that either. One of the few times where I feel like the way that George R. R. Martin handled that was a bit of a misstep. And Rashawn and I both got like really impatient with listening to her talk to herself about all of the people she used to love and how each and every one of them is dead now and how, oh, I don't even have this and that left. They're dead too. And it was just like over and over and over again. Thera hasn't done that. She hasn't repeatedly listed and calculated all of her losses. And yet, when I think of Thera, all I can think of is how much she's been through and lost. It's like, I don't need it to be repeated and beaten into my head because it is so an intrinsic part of her character that, and there is such a lack of real self-pity in her, you know, like, she has gone through this and she's still trying to soldier through and make it to the other side. And there is something about her attitude in it all and her real attempts to like fulfill her obligations to Dara despite fucking being put through the ringer repeatedly that I can't help but just respect and see as part of her now. So she has this moments of I've already lost so much, and it didn't feel like self-pity. It didn't feel like, ugh, this again. She had lost the guidance of her parents, departed from the embrace of her lover, been torn from her children whose fate she knew not, left behind the world of her birth, islands as sweet as lotus-paste moonbread, as familiar as the voices of her brothers and sister, as comforting as the curves of onologograms indelibly carved into the topography of her mind. And now she was being asked to lose the man she loved, her confidant, her bedrock, the father of her children, the mirror of her soul. No, not just to lose him, but to commit an unforgivable act. "What do you want?" she shouted silently at the gods. There was no answer. I felt that, man. This just, the reaching that point where you're just like, I truly don't know what I am supposed to do. Like, it feels like I am just never going to win. And granted, I've never been through anything like what she's been through. But I have reached points like that in my life where I'm like, I just guess it's not going to get better. I guess this is just it, you know? And facing this and knowing that she's going to have to plunge this fucking knife into his heart. Like, oh my God. The wisdom of the Anno sages was useless to her, as was the experience of her life's journey so far. The boundless scrublands of Gonde were not the islands of Dara, No more than voice paintings and spirit portraits were the ancient scrolls of Anno sages. The faceless, distant deities of the Aegon were not the gods of her home, who liked to take on human form and interfere in mortal affairs. She would never again see the family of her birth, kiss her first love, teach her children the beauty of that land on the other side of the ocean. The people who surrounded her and demanded of her the impossible were not her people. They did not understand the world through her stories. She had never missed home so much. The pain of longing bent her like a blade of long-ear grass in the storm, and she wept, bereft, alone, silenced. She would remain here forever, as though at the bottom of a water bubble in the grass sea, abandoning and abandoned by the mortal world. Oh, my God. This is just... It's really something. This is really beautifully done. Come back to us, my beloved, my breath. Solion telling her she had the heart of an Aegon and entrusting her son to her. Ice flowers tumbling along the beach. Crystalline dandelion seeds singing of the beauty of life, even as they broke apart. Volue, sly and despicable Volue, recounting for them the tale of Kuju seeing the iceberg in Pea Sea, explained as a sign from the gods for him to assume the title of Pekyu. Kunilatika and Giantika, looking proud next to the Arakua Tokuwa creation, a blend of the bones of scrubland warriors and pieces of clay Anno logograms. Sitting next to Thorio and admiring the beauty of a valley in the World's Edge Mountains, a valley deeper and bigger than any in Dara. The thrill of flying on the back of a Garinnifin, of gaining the trust of a partner who was a mountain of muscle and sinew, a living storm, a breathing cloud, of feeling the rumbling voice that could not be heard. Kami and Alkir walking toward her in the sunlight, the glistening raindrops on their heads more dazzling than priceless jewels. Hearing and watching stories of Kikisavo and Afir being told by the shamans at the winter festival, while the tune of the Pea pipes still rang in her ears, while the contrasting flavors of the 10 meats still lingered at the tip of her tongue. Standing in the moonlight, facing Takval. The heart isn't a fixed pool like a water bubble in the grass sea. It grows and swells like the ocean. Your mother has become my mother, and your people my people. Sometimes we have to demand that others make sacrifices and accept them to secure the freedom of the many. So, she says goodbye, Dara. And I am assuming this means she is handing the reins of returning over to Thorio forever. But I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. This is just it's a lot. So this is how she comes up with this concept of a way to outsmart Kuju and sort of use his paranoia against him. And I really do enjoy the development of this plan before Takval dies so that she's able to explain to him the way that he will be involved in it. And let's see. What does it do? Those who are about to mount the Cloud Garinnifin sometimes need a last burst of strength. Kami and Thorio turned away to wipe their eyes, but Thera kept her gaze locked with Takval's. Every second remaining between them was precious. Yeah. I would also be like this. So, they begin their speech, and they are playing this drum, and all of this is hugely ritualistic. They're taking his spirit portrait as well with like his last breaths. And he designates her as the next Pekyu, and she has the knife. Let's demand sacrifices of each other. Let's accept each other's sacrifices. My breath, lead my people, which is also your people, to victory. And she does it. She stabs him. And he doesn't scream. His body just like kind of buckles, but he doesn't scream. They looked at each other, and there was so much longing and despair and hope and pain that the others could not bear to watch. Slowly, Thera leaned down and locked her lips with his in a deep kiss, taking his breath into her lungs as his heart stopped beating. I am Thera Garu Aragos, wife of Takval Aragos, son of Solian Aragos. I claim kinship to Afir by blood and breath. I have taken a life and incorporated its strength into mine. I now serve the Aegon people as Pekyu. Oof, y'all. This was rough. I like, it was beautiful, you know, but that's what makes it so hard. As spring thawed Ukyugonde, the rebels in Nalyufin's pasture also emerged from their winter preparations. Several rebels had died during the difficult and bleak winter. Their bodies, along with Takval's, had been preserved in ice. These were now encased in Dara-style coffins fashioned from local materials. 2 coffins, larger than the others, were decorated with the death masks of Thera and Takval. In actuality, the coffin with Thera's mask contained no corpse at all. One found inside a waterproof barrel of sea cow hide, reinforced with bone hoops packed tightly with all the remaining firework powder in Thera's possession, along with sharp-edged gravel, stones suitable for slingshots, and even some rusty metal shards. I just love this. It's just filled with fucking shrapnel. And they managed to like create something with a tube that is similar to the Gerinifin tooth in the way that creates a spark. And let's see, the other large coffin held Takval's body. All the decoys, including the 4 smaller coffins. Oh, you know what? I said earlier that I thought that wasn't Takval's body, and it wasn't. That's right. It was a decoy body. But nevertheless, like, you get what I'm saying. And knowing that Kuju was cautious and would suspect booby traps, Thera planned on the smaller coffins being opened first, perhaps by someone Kuju thought of as disposable. Which, this bitch is too smart. I love her so much. She really has that fucking asshole's number. Thera gambled the Lyuku Pekyu would personally open the larger coffins, thereby bringing about his own demise. Since she couldn't be sure Kuju would leave her own coffin to the last, it was vital for Takval's body to be packed into the other decoy coffin as a final layer of deception. But in addition to such practical considerations, Thera also found the gesture poetically appropriate. It felt right to have Takval present at the scene of Kuju's defeat. You promised me you would bring me to Totten in the spring. You've always kept your word. Y'all. This is great. It's such a victory and it's such a loss. This is just, oh man. And she sends Kitos and Thorio with a band of warriors towards Totten, and Thera led the remaining rebels to a spot northeast of Totten. Each group had their own separate parts to play in Thera's scheme. And that is the end of chapter 15. So here we are, poised, and I'm really, really curious who's crossing the wall. I don't, like, Kuju's gone, but is there going to be somebody else who steps up? I don't know. We shall see. Are they going to have, like, Thorio step up and pretend to take control? Like, is that possible? I don't even know. I don't know how this stuff works. All right. I love this section, though. It was very good. Thank you, Kyle, so much for commissioning this and for your patience in me having to reschedule. Appreciate you a lot. And thank you to Miss T for hanging out in the chat with me. Appreciate you as well. And love you so much. Hope you're enjoying the coverage. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.